Hello, and welcome to our Heart Health series. This episode is over eating and mental health. This is presented by the Abilene-Taylor County Public Health District. So, as an introduction just to food in general, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that food is there to help take care of our minds, bodies, and build connection. Food isn't just about what you put into your body so that you can have energy. Instead, it can be about having social connections as well as can be related to your mental health, which is why having a good relationship with food is really important in order to maintain your health. Even though food is not just there only to give us energy, it is important to acknowledge that whenever you do spend your energy, whether you're exercising or you're just really like living, you need energy back. And food is there to help take care of your body and help give you that energy. Some foods give you more energy than others. It's important to have a solid balance of the types of foods that you're consuming. With food, one thing to keep an eye out for is fats. So there is both saturated fat and unsaturated fats. One of the reasons why we look out for fat sometimes is that foods that are high in saturated fat can increase bad cholesterol. However, it's important to note that saturated and unsaturated fats alike are both important in order to maintain your overall health, and that they do contribute to some essential body functions. Some common foods that do have saturated fats might be things such as butter or lard, certain red meats, cream, cured meats, or southern biscuits. So just kind of an overview of some of the more common foods that we see around here. So while these foods are not bad by any means, one approach with this can be looking at things that have lower fat. So instead of red meats, probably looking at white meats or looking at red meats that have lower amounts of fat and are more lean, as well as cutting out certain things that have higher saturated fats, or just looking for the options that have lower fats overall. Another thing to be aware of is salts. Salt is important because while salt is essential, too much salt can make our hearts work harder than they need to. So we can think about this as increasing our blood pressure, which can increase risks of things like having a heart attack or different types of heart disease. So it's important to be aware of how much salt you're consuming, especially because salt is put in a lot of different things, and a lot of times we get more salt than we need. So things such as chips, soy sauce, ramen, beef bowls, bacon, canned soups or stews, frozen dinners, cakes, or packaged snacks, as well as things like condiments. So it's important to be aware of the salts that you have in your different foods and maybe look for different options if you're worried you might be eating too much salt that have lower sodium. Because for most people, we could probably do with a bit less. Whenever we're looking at food in general, it's important to acknowledge that there are certain barriers. Not everyone can cook everything for themselves all the time because there's a lot of things such as having not enough energy, not feeling like you have enough time, not having enough money, not having knowledge or access, as well as having disability. So there can be a lot of different barriers that might prevent you from being able to eat the foods that your body needs or be able to prepare those foods for yourself. And while certain things we cannot change, we can look at ways that we can work within these barriers in order to still build our health. So whenever we're looking at the barrier of time and energy, approach that we might be able to take is to look at doing more bulk meal prep. So bulk meal prep could be things such as just preparing the ingredients and then you can cook those whenever you get home. Or it can be things such as preparing whether it's your breakfast, lunch, or dinner for the entire week or just for a few days. Overall, it's just looking at ways that you can have your meals planned out in order to make the cooking of the meals a bit easier. Another approach could be meal kit services. It's important to know, however, that certain meal kit services do cost quite a bit. Another approach is to split the work. So if you have anyone around you who might be able to help split the work with you, whether that's having a friend and doing meal prep together, or if it's having someone that you live with help with the cooking process, splitting the work can make things take a lot less time as well as a lot less energy. Another approach is to have grocery ordering and delivering. So this can be especially important for those with disability. However, if you lack the time and energy in order to go grocery shopping, because it can take quite a while, sometimes looking at having your groceries delivered or doing pickup can really help with cutting down that time and energy. An important step with this as well is to recognize some of the causes. So looking at why do you lack the time or energy, as well as is there realistic steps that you can take in order to change this. So looking at the reasons why you're not able to eat in ways that make you either healthier or happier, and maybe trying to take steps in order to change that if you can. Whenever we're looking at money, groceries cost a lot. A few approaches is to try to cook more from home. While sometimes it does seem appealing to just stop by the fast food restaurant, especially if you don't have that time or energy, that really does stack up. Another approach is to budget. And budgeting kind of goes right hand in hand with the ideas of making a list and meal planning. So by meal planning, you know what foods you're going to be making, you know how much they cost, you can see what ingredients that you might need across the entire board so you're not buying a bunch of small amounts of different ingredients, but instead you're buying large amounts of one ingredient, which can be more cost effective. And making a list and a budget can help keep you from buying things that you do not need. To help this, you can also look at buying in season foods. In season foods are typically cheaper, but they are also typically better for you. And then also staying on the borders of the grocery store. Typically, it's where the meats and the dairy and the bread is. So those are all typically whole foods, and you're usually wanting to have more whole foods in your diet. So if you stay on the borders of the grocery store, typically you're going to be eating a lot healthier, as well as it'll usually be a lot cheaper. Another option is to buy frozen or canned fruits and veggies. While frozen and canned foods do sometimes cost more, they can last longer. And this can be really important whenever you need something to last and you don't have the option to prepare it to either be canned or frozen yourself. The only thing you typically want to look out for is to make sure that they don't have any heavy syrup or sodium in them. Another thing is to avoid getting pre-cut fruits and veggies. While sometimes this is needed for disability or sometimes even just for time, pre-cut fruits and veggies cost a lot more than fresh fruits and veggies. So if you're looking at getting some fresh produce, typically just going for the whole thing, cutting it yourself will be a lot cheaper. And other options is to look at different food services as well as food pantries or applying for something like food stamps or WIC. There's no shame in getting some help, and it's great to know that the options are there if you ever do find yourself in a position where you think that you might want to utilize those options. Another barrier can sometimes be disability. Some approaches that can help with this can sometimes be things like pre-cut produce. So as we mentioned earlier, pre-cut produce can cost quite a bit more. However, if you do have a disability and you don't have the ability to cut those, or at least it might take more energy than you may consider it worth, and you're able to have the money to cover that cost, pre-cut produce can be really helpful. As well as looking at different pre-made meal components. So, while of course whole foods are ideal, sometimes you are able to get more pre-made foods, whether it's pre-seasoned proteins or certain canned foods or dried foods. That can really help with cutting down the type of work that you have to do in order to eat healthier. You can also try and get support from other people who can help you with that process, or who can do the majority of the process for you, as well as different meal kit services. However, of course, this can, as we noted before, be a bit more costly. And then looking at things like grocery delivery or curbside pickup in order to not have to go through the process of going into the store, which can, of course, also help with the money component by staying on a specific list. And then physical accommodations. Whether it's having a stove in the kitchen or it's using certain type of silverware, having different options for what can accommodate you and make the process easier can be really helpful. Sometimes talking to a doctor can also help with this, so they can give you some ideas of what might be helpful. Overall, one of the things to mention is My Plate. So we do have another series, which is the Create Better Health series, which we talk quite a bit more about nutrition as well as the My Plate specifically. However, it's just generally a great starting place for any sort of meal prepping, as well as just looking at how you're eating throughout the day. On to the topic of mental health. So overall, mental health and physical health are very interconnected. We see a lot of impacts on how the mental and the physical do connect. One important thing to note is that having a mental health condition does not mean that there is a certain thing wrong with the individual. It is not a flaw or an insult to anyone's character, regardless of whatever the condition is. Anyone can have a mental health condition, and it is noted that just about 1 in 5 American adults do have a mental health condition. It's important to be aware that mental health is very prevalent, and even for people who don't have a mental health condition, your mental health is very important to maintain. Partially so you do not develop a mental health condition, but also because it does interact with your physical health as well as things like your emotional and social health. A bit more on the physical and mental health. So mental health struggles and stress are common risk factors for things such as heart disease, heart attack, having high bad cholesterol, high blood pressure, and high blood sugar. All of these things are related back to your heart health. One way that you can protect your heart is by listening to your heart and what you need. One of the big topics whenever we talk about mental health is the concept of self care. Self care is the ways that we learn how to take care of our minds and our bodies. So, this cannot just be mental health, it can be things like your physical health and your emotional health, as well as your social health. So, self care really embodies everything about your health. One thing that can help is by learning how to make a routine for every area of self care that you need. This doesn't mean that you have to write out that routine, although it can help. It just means kind of taking inventory of what things do you do every day that helps your physical health? What things do you do every day that helps your mental health or your emotional health? What things do you do that helps your social health? So paying attention on where we might be lacking on these different types of self-care can kind of help navigate where exactly we should be focusing a little bit more energy so we can take better care of ourselves. So similarly to what we were talking about with food, whenever you spend energy, you need energy again. And this is kind of how self-care works as well. So it's important to keep in mind whenever you're spending your energy and whenever you're gaining energy, and that these things depend on everyone. So for one person, hanging out with their friends could be spending energy, while for another person, it could be them gaining energy. So, for example, for someone going to the store, cleaning, or exercising, that might be them all spending their energy. So, in order to take care of themselves, they look at a different way to gain their energy, such as having some alone time, or engaging some of their hobbies, or taking a relaxing bath. All these things depends on the individual. It's important to know what exactly you see as spending your energy or gaining energy for you, and try to find a way that you can balance those things. Another thing, of course, to know whenever it comes to self care and mental health is to know about treatment. So, anyone can benefit from mental health treatment regardless of if you have a mental health condition. Treatment is becoming a lot more common, and there are a lot of different community resources, some that we have listed on the Abby Rebuild Health website. There are many different options, and it really just depends on what would work for you. There are things like therapy, which involves so many different varieties, as well as options such as peer support and community support, medication, and even more. So, generally, don't try to go at it alone, especially if you feel like you need that additional help. One of the things that can be most helpful is just to open up to someone about that. Overall, if we're able to take better care of both our physical health and our mental health, then hopefully we can live happier and longer lives. Thank you so much for listening. This was the last episode of the Heart Health class. I hope that you learned something, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.